Congress didn't agree with what was being set up in 1944, 45, 46. Congress couldn't sign on a dotted line for World Trade Organization. They want to protect American farming. But there was something called GATT set up. And that, in 1995, when Clinton was president, that became the World Trade Organization. About a strategy for Britain in an uncertain world in 50 minutes is quite a tall order. Anyway, particularly so since I don't actually believe in nations having strategies. I think much of what happens is rather disorganized, and nevertheless, having said that, I am lucky to have lived. I'm in my mid 70s. Lived in a world that's been, as far as I'm concerned, at peace. Indeed, we've had peace now, really, since the end of the Second World War. So it's been 80 years of peace, and of course, all sorts of minor wars, various places and upsets, but still, basically peace. And certainly peace between the main industrial countries, main advanced countries. And this owes much to institutions that were set up at the end of the Second World War, largely by America and Britain in a set of institutions, but also with a wider vision of what, if you wish, the world strategy should be, and within that, what Britain's strategy should be. So now my main theme this evening is that there is a way of thinking about the world in which might is right. For a powerful nation, you should use that power and use it for the benefit of the citizens of that country. But there's another view, which is really the basis of the post-war 80 years of peace, which I'll call Anglo-American liberal internationalism. And to all those people here who regard me as a fascist and to the right of Attila the Hun, I am a liberal internationalist. Okay, let's just, this phrase, well, there's actually, I looked this up on Google, there was actually a book, curiously published in Chicago, but it was published in the 1890s when this phrase was widely attributed to Germany, Prussia in particular. Of course, it's Prussia that had brought Germany together, Bismarck, and it was Prussia that was supposed to believe in this doctrine of might is right. You can see the reference there to might was right when German troops poured through Paris Gay. There's of course reference to 1870 when the Franco-Prussian War, which is a very quick war in which Germany defeated France. In the time of the First World War, it was well understood in Britain and elsewhere, I suppose, that we weren't like that, were we? And so this is attributed to Germany. And of course, one has to say, looking back, there are some parts of the world that have just been obliterated from the map, and one of them is Prussia. But that's, I suppose, the result of these two wars and what then happened. At any rate, this chap, actually called Walter Raleigh, put a pamphlet in 1914. This is very much the German doctrine, the basis on which they fought the First World War. We didn't do things like that. Now then, that's a problem in this subject, which is that the British Empire, we don't do things like that, do we? Well, the Royal Navy, we exerted might all over the world through the Royal Navy for a long time, and that kept the British Empire going. On the other hand, nobody ever planned the British Empire. This was a chap called Seeley, had a book on the expansion of England, 1883, in which he said that the British Empire was acquired in a fit of absence of mind. It was never planned. It was never a national strategy. I think that sometimes people in China today think that the British Empire somehow was planned, and what they're doing is something like that. No, it was never planned. At any rate, at the end of the First World War, a chap called Woodrow Wilson, president, um, he gave a speech. This is, it shouldn't be 2018, it's 1918, on the 14 points. And what he said there was that national aspirations are to be respected. People may now be dominated and governed only by their own consent. And this principle of self-determination was then very important after the First World War in breaking up the Austro-Hungarian Empire and also the Ottoman Empire. Whether what happened in Eastern Europe in the following 20 or 30 years was a very good thing compared with Franz Joseph, people might debate, but there we are. They're broken up. And then the basic principle is that a small nation has the right to exist. This is the Americans. This is Woodrow Wilson, 1918. And it's the exact antithesis of might is right. Now, there's a lot going on here. One of the things going on is the Americans wanting to replace the British as the world's dominant power, which of course they did. And then in August 1941, you see, this is a document that was actually written by a British civil servant, a chap called Alexander Cadogan, and this is called the Atlantic Charter. And the first thing, no territorial gains. This is an agreement between Roosevelt and Churchill. This is before the Americans had joined the Second World War, before they'd been attacked by Japan. But these are the things that were agreed between America and Britain. After the war, there was going to be an end of the war, and actually they both knew that Britain and America were going to continue. No territorial gains were sought by either of them. Territorial adjustments must be in accord with the wishes of the people concerned. People have a right to self-determination, that's Wilson. You mustn't obstruct supply routes of raw materials. It's equal access for all nations, global economic cooperation, social welfare. Participants work for a world free of want and fear. Participants work for freedom of the seas, navigation, all the rest of it, and disarmament of aggression at nations, and common disarmament by the two nations that at the time, Britain was more powerful than Germany at the time, were the dominant military powers. Now, it's this document which is the basis of the post-war institutions. It never went to Parliament, never went to Congress. It was sort of signed, but never was. Anyway, there we are. And indeed, let's be clear, it was actually at an American base. The Americans just been given this base because there'd been a deal, which is very much a might is right deal, by the way, between America and Britain. Anyway, never mind. This was where the UN, the IMF, the World Bank were all really implicitly being conceived to create the post-war world. Great, fine. So now we know why we've had this 80 years of peace, roughly speaking. For example, trade barriers have been lowered, reciprocal, mutually beneficial basis. Atlantic Charter was never went to Congress. Congress didn't agree with what was being set up in 1944, 45, 46. Congress couldn't sign on a dotted line for a World Trade Organization. They want to protect American farming. But there was something called GATT set up. And that, in 1995, when Clinton was president, that became the World Trade Organization. IMF, World Bank, and so on. And of course, the World Bank was to help Europe, including Germany, to help Japan recover after the Second World War. Remarkable generosity given all of the background. Now, international rule of law, multilateralism. Think about how voting takes place at the UN. USA has one vote in the General Assembly. UK has one vote, 27 million, and so on. Might is not right. Okay. The GATT, the World Trade Organization, the works on the basis of, in principle, in theory, most favored nation principle. Any nation can have a very high tariff, a 200%, 300% tariff, that's allowed. But it must be the same for all nations. Every trade partner is the most favored nation, all right? And you're subject to the rules that apply to all. So the spirit of multilateralism is the antithesis of bilateralism. Okay, fine. And now we have Donald Trump. Now look, this chap, he is just simply, he hasn't read any of the stuff that was the background. I don't understand really how phenomenal that this really occurs, but it has occurred. Some of the people around him in 2017 realized that there was a problem relative to what they expected American presidents to believe and to what they had understood from the history of their nation. And so they took Trump, which is Rex Tillerson and a chap called McMaster, and his Secretary of Defense, a chap called Mattis. They took him to the tank, which is one of the rooms in the Pentagon where high strategy is decided, and gave him a presentation about all these treaties, and probably rather some of the stuff I've just given you might even have been told to him. And then Trump responded to their faces, and he said, this is a bunch of this is all of these people and top US generals, that they're a bunch of dopes, losers, and babies. Afterwards, Tillerson, not in Trump's earshot, called Trump an F moron, and that circulated, and he was fired a few months later. America might invade Greenland. America is going to have not all most favored nations, so if you do every single nation must be the same. No, we're going to have announced tariffs as a bargaining counter at high level. For each individual nation will try and do a deal with each one. Bilateralism at its most extreme. So that's where we are. I don't know that, obviously, this isn't the purpose of evening to discuss the American politics. Obviously, Trump won't be around forever. I don't believe myself that this strain of populism in the Republican Party will dominate the Republican Party forever, or that if it does, that the Democrats will be permanently out of office. In fact, I rather expect that the Democrats will have a landslide in the midterm congressionals next year. However, we have got to think about a strategy for Britain. That's the purpose of this evening's conference, this evening's discussion. So I'm just going to close with some comments here. First of all, it's a quite different topic, but we must keep the independent nuclear deterrent. I'm sorry. It's a dangerous world. And whatever one has to say about all of these things, the notion that America, our ally, we share the foreign intelligence and the things that are passing between the American intelligence services now is every day incredibly sensitive. And they're not shared. They're between America and Britain and the three other countries that take part in all this. But then I think it's very important that we reaffirm our commitment to the principles of Anglo-American liberal internationalism. And I've just said that. Can I just say here that Canada and Australia matter quite a lot in this context. I'll just very briefly mention Russia and then shut up about Russia. Russia is a very unimportant nation economically. In manufacturing terms, it is just so utterly unimportant that the notion that it represents a threat to the West is preposterous. Let's just be clear that Russia has failed to defeat Ukraine in over 3 years of war, and at the moment it's struggling very hard to make any progress and failing. Have you ever seen on the streets here, seen lots of Russian cars, Japanese cars, German cars, or cars in future from China? Ever seen Russian cars? Ever been in the Russian planes? Look, they're useless. They did have some stake in international weapons trade. In the last few years, it's collapsed. Even India is now substituting the USA for Russia because Russian weapons are no use. And this stuff about having to raise to 25% of GDP, there's no way that's going to happen. It's all totally dishonest. And I'm afraid it's all there, really, to satisfy this idiot in the White House. No way it's going to happen. It's not remotely necessary anyway. I'll shut up on that front now. And for myself, I'm very pleased that we're outside the EU in this context, and that we have therefore not to be constrained by our EU membership or any kind of affiliation with it. Although we have got to work with our neighbours, obviously. How am I going for time, Barry?
Well, if you could start to wrap up.
All right, okay. One final thing I'll say is that it's not all gloom and doom. Now, I hope I get this right, this mnemonic. It's CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. What's that got to do with it? The WTO is on its last legs. This isn't really well, it's sort of America's fault. They had a panel of judges that about 10 years ago decided a case that just China against, I can't remember exactly who, but China was being accused of subsidizing its industries when it was exporting and the state subsidies are against the rules. The judges decided that China was in the right. At which point, understandably, the Americans say this is outrageous, and they then, ever since then, have not been prepared to endorse any new judges for the arbitration panel, and have stopped giving money to the WTO. The WTO is basically dead. However, the CPTPP, this is an organization that essentially preserves the principles that were initially agreed back in the 1940s between America and Britain. America is not a member of it. China wants to join, Japanese not having China in. We joined, although we're not a Pacific nation, but at least the member states understand the things and the governments that I've been talking about this evening, and that at least gives us, the European Union might join the CPTPP, in which case it is in effect a kind of revived WTO, and let's hope that something like this happens. Can I just finish by saying that, obviously in this room, we've most of us, I've got grey hair, we've lived through Thatcher and Reagan and people like that, and won't be lucky. I think it's so sad that there aren't, perhaps we've got two politicians on the panel. We've got politicians, I wish they're politicians able to articulate with passion, enthusiasm, and intellectual power the case for returning to Anglo-American liberal internationalism. Thank you very much. Thank you.